Welcome to Shanmugam IAS Academy. This editorial analysis of 14th December 2021. Before going into the topic, I just wanted to inform you that that is Shanmugam IAS Academy, conducting free scholarship test on December 19th. Those who want to write the test, they can enroll in the Shanmugam IAS Academy's website. And now we'll move into the topic. And today's editorial is about Northeastern States and AFSPA, that is Armed Forces Special Powers Act. So what it is exactly, and we all know that those who were reading the newspapers continuously last week to Nagaland issue has happened. More than 14 civilians has been killed there, and like military operation there. So many protests are going on, and now we are going to study briefly about what is this ASPA and where this act is there in which states, and what is the background of this. We all going to study this in this editorial. So I am going to give a brief background, brief history of this ASPA Act, and before how it is there in India. Before independence in August 15, 1942. 1942 means what we are all getting in our memory. That is the Quit India movement. That is at that time the British promulgated the Armed Forces Special Powers Ordinance to suppress the Quit India movement, because that time so many big leaders like Mahatma Gandhi has been put behind the bars, and people came in the form of protests. So that time British came up with the ordinance, that is Armed Forces Special Powers Ordinance in the 1942 August 15. And after that what happened? 1954, the country faces insurgency in Naga districts of Assam, and Government of India passes the Armed Forces Special Powers Act in 1958, because by keeping this the concern, that is because the Naga districts that is bordering Assam faces the insurgency there. And 1964, the United National Liberation Front, a separatist militant group seeking independence from India, that time 64, from Manipur. From where? From Manipur, followed by the formation of many other insurgent groups were there in the Manipur. So Manipur declared as a disturbed area at that time, and Armed Forces Special Powers Act was imposed in the late 1980s. And in Tripura, tribal movement was against Bengali migrants from Bangladesh, started in 1947, and the situation worsens in 1967. By 1970s, the migrants starting retaliating the security situations in that worsens there, and the government imposes the armed forces, that is Assam and Manipur Special Powers Act. That is, at that time it is Assam and Manipur Special Powers Act in Tripura in November 1970, and this act was fully imposed in the state on 1997 16 February. And but today the law has been lifted in Tripura. In Tripura, there is no law of AFSPA today. I am talking about the back history. And in 1990, following large-scale violence that is perpetrated by the United Liberation Force of Assam, in Assam, the entire state was declared as a disturbed area, and the Armed Forces Assam and Manipur Special Powers Act was enforced in the state of Assam. And these are the acts, and we are 1990. The Parliament has passed the Armed Forces Jammu and Kashmir Special Powers Act, which was deemed to have come into force retrospectively from 5th July 1990. 1919, we have Special Act, that is Jammu and Kashmir Special Powers Act. In 1990, it was came, and why we are studying? Because I have given you the brief background and history of this Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and in which states these acts are there. And I have told you. Now we'll study about the issue, why exactly we are studying this editorial today, and what is the context here. Because this was there from so many years, but now this is frequently in the newspapers because of this issue, that is the killing of 14 civilians in the military operation in Nagaland, that has led to the free calls for repealing this Armed Forces Special Powers Act, that is shortly AFSPA, a stringent law that allows the armed forces to use maximum force in an area declared as disturbed. And this is what is going on. This is what the context is about. That is why we are reading this editorial frequently in the newspapers. So that's why I have given you a brief background about this too. And following this incident, many demanded to repeal this law has become quite vociferous. That is more louder these days. Among those calling it for withdrawal, the chief ministers of Nagaland, Meghalaya, also said that withdrawal of this act, and we'll study the historical background of this AFSPA Act. AFSPA Act, like many others controversial laws that which was in colonial origin. I have told you in the starting of this editorial, 1942 August 15, during the Quit India movement, British has promulgated an ordinance about this Special Powers Act. So this was at that time in the colonial origin itself. The AFSPA Act was first enacted as an ordinance in the backdrop of Quit India movement, which was launched by Mahatma Gandhi in 1942. And a day after which, 1940, the movement became leaderless and that turned violent at many places across the country, like the leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, and a host of others had been put behind the bars. This was the issue, and after that, I am telling brief history. And shaken by the massive scale of this violence across the country, at that time, then Viceroy Linglitho promulgated the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, that is ordinance in 1942. This was a past history, and this is how this came into the colonial origin that time. This ordinance practically gave the armed forces a license to kill when faced with the internal disturbances. So this was what, and the purpose was this exactly, for to take this ordinance. On the lines of this ordinance, the Indian government promulgated 4 ordinances in 1947 to deal with the internal security issues and also the unrest which was arising due to the partition in 4 provinces of Bengal, that is Assam, East Bengal, and the United Provinces. That time, so many issues that dealt with the internal security issues because of the unrest in these states. And what is the origin of this Armed Forces Special Powers Act exactly? Now we are going to study now. The wake of the partition, the riots, 4 ordinances were promulgated in 1947. What was that? The first was the Bengal was told as it was a disturbed areas, special powers of armed forces. This was told in 1947 as in the form of ordinances, and this was followed by the ordinances for Assam, East Punjab and Delhi and the United Provinces. That is United Provinces is UP now. These were replaced by the common legislation, that is Armed Forces Special Powers Act in 1948, and which was meant to be forced for 1 year but was repealed in only 1947. That time when this act came in 1948, that time they told that it was only forced for 1 year but it was repealed only in 1947. That is exactly after 9 years. And President promulgated Armed Forces Assam and Manipur Special Powers Ordinance in 1958, and subsequently this act was replaced with the parliament initially known as the Armed Forces Assam and Manipur Special Powers Act. Initially it was subsequently adopted in appropriately after the creation of Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland and Tripura. That time this was adopted in these states too. And now we need to study this thing, because in prelims they can ask which parts of the country come under this Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which states exactly. This Armed Forces Special Powers Act has been in force for decades, 1942, but most parts of the northeastern states, exactly. That's why in the editorial heading I have told you, I have written there northeastern states and AFSPA, because most parts of the northeastern states has this act. Under this law, an area can be declared as a disturbed area, bringing into play the protection it offers to the armed forces for the use of force in the notified area. But today, as of today, this is Dream's point of view, very important. And as of today, the whole of Assam and Nagaland are said to be the disturbed areas. Now, this act is wholly in the northeastern states of Assam and Nagaland. Only in these states, this act is fully there. This act was implemented there. The last 6 months extension was made, because the notification said that it was extended periodically, mostly for 6 months at a time. Every 6 months it has to be extended periodically. The last month extension was made on here in Assam in August 28 and June 30th. It was respectively in Nagaland. And we all need to know this, because mostly 6 months we have to extend this at a time. Okay, the whole of Manipur with the the whole of Manipur, this act is there, but with the exception of the Impal municipal area. Impal is the capital of Manipur. With the exception of Impal municipal area has been notified by the state government from 1 year. For 1 year from the December 2020, but so the whole of Manipur is not under this act, because this exception is there for the Imphal municipal area, and is also in the Arunachal Pradesh too. Arunachal Pradesh, this act is there, but we will confuse if there is a question coming in prelims that does Arunachal Pradesh this act is there. Yes, that is there, but it is not fully in that area, because it is said to be a disturbed area by the notification, which is confined only to the districts of Tirap, Changlang and Longding, and the areas falling under Namsai and Mahadevpur police stations, which were bordering Assam. Only these districts are only have this act. Okay, but fully Arunachal Pradesh doesn't have this act. This we need to know. Only Assam and Nagaland will have fully this act. Okay, the AFSPA Act was revoked in Tripura. I have told you already, in May 2015 it was revoked from in Tripura states, and Meghalaya was under AFSPA Act for 27 years until, but it was also revoked from April 1, 2018. The act was implemented in only 20-kilometer area along the border with Assam. The whole state, the act was taken out, but only this 20-kilometer area along the border of Assam which was implemented. And I have told you that this also, Jammu and Kashmir has a separate J&K, that is Jammu and Kashmir Armed Forces Special Powers Act, that was enacted in 1990. And this we know in which states it is this law, this act is there, and all we have studied now. And now we need to study what exactly this act says. So this act empowers the governor of any state or the administrator of the union territory or the central government to notify the parts of the whole of a state or a union territory as a disturbed area. So if they consider that a condition in such area is so dangerous for them, if they are considering that or disturbed, then the use of this armed forces is necessarily is aid enough civil power. So if this administrator, governor, if they feel that that area was a disturbed area, this act can be like come in with which aid this civil power. This act will come in those areas. If such a that is in such a notified area, any officer of the armed forces may fire upon or use force even to the point of causing death under this act against any person for the maintenance of public order. To maintain this public order, the armed forces person may fire upon or use force even to the point of causing death under this act. This is dangerous too, but this must be done after giving due warning as considered necessary. The target must be a person who is contravening any law or prohibiting the assembly of 5 or more persons carrying weapons, firearms or ammunition. If they are carrying 5 persons in a group, if they are carrying weapons, firearms in their hands, so they have the permission to make any provision, any act under this law. And the act allows the arrest and search of any premises without a warrant in the notified area. Nowadays, if this has to be search operations, if has to be taken place, there has to be a warrant. But under this act, this allows the arrest and search of any premises without a warrant in a notified area, and the recovery of any confined person or any arms and ammunitions are stored unlawfully. So this is the power of this act. And no person can be prosecuted or subjected to any legal proceedings for action which were taken under this act, that is AFSPA Act, without the central government's previous sanction. So this is also one of the point under this act. So this is what the act says. That is why how the AFSPA was received by the people, because we all know a great example, Irom Sharmila, who will call as Iron Lady of the Manipur, has been towering figure. We all know she is fighting from 16 years from a long hunger strike against this AFSPA Act. In November 2000, when Irom was 28-year-old, at that time an incident was happened. This is a great example. 10 civilians were allegedly gunned down by the 8th Assam Rifles at Malom Makha Likhai near the Impal's Tulihal airport. And this infamous incident is commonly known as the Malom massacre. So this was happened in 2000. The massacre prompted Irom to begin this hunger strike against these atrocities in Malom. And the 3 days after she began her fast, Irom was arrested because she was attempting suicide. That time she was arrested because but she continued the AFSPA, the hunger strike against this AFSPA Act for 16 years. But AFSPA was withdrawn from the Impal municipal area in 2004 after several civil society campaigns. The hunger strike by Irom Sharmila being the most high profile of them. And there was a huge backlash also across the state 2004 because there's one incident was happened in the Manipur state, that is a bullet ridden body of Tangjam Manorama, who was raped and murdered allegedly by a group of Assam rifles men, was found at Bamnu Kampu village in the Impal district. So this was also one of the issue that time was there, and these are all the examples I have given you here. So this can be very helpful for writing, for framing an answer, for giving an example. And what are the recommendations the committees have given? In 2005, a government appointed a 5-member committee which was headed by the retired Supreme Court Judge P. Jeevan Reddy. Recommended that AFSPA has to be repealed. And he suggested that Unlawful Activities Act should be suitably amended to deal with the terrorism. So this act is exactly there for terrorism, the disturbed areas. It made this recommendation as it felt that AFSPA was created an impression that the people of the northeast states were being targeted for the hostile treatment. And there is also another committee which was headed by Mr. Santosh Hedge, which was appointed by the Supreme Court, and with the following petition filed by the extrajudicial execution victim Families Association of Manipur, asking it to look into 6 charges of unlawful encounter killings in the Manipur. And the Santosh Hedge committee submitted its report in 2013 saying 5 of the 6 encounters were not genuine. That disproportionate force has been used against the persons with no known criminal antecedents, and the AFSPA gave sweeping powers to the men in uniform without granting citizens protection against its misuse. This was the Santosh Hedge committee has submitted in their report. However, Army has been resolutely opposed to the repeal of this AFSPA Act. But in the conclusion, I'll be telling you here that it's a time that the sincere and concerted efforts are to be made continuously by the 4 stakeholders. The first stakeholder is the civil society, the armed forces, the states, and the government of India. And they need to find a peaceful solution to the festering problem of this AFSPA Act, and AFSPA should be amended to make it more comprehensive with elaborate rules with respect to the manner of investigations of alleged human rights violations to reduce the possibility of its being abused. So under this act, so many good things are also there, so many bad things are also there. So this is a concern. All the 4 stakeholders has to take a decision of this act, because the human rights violations are also side by side happening, and to reduce this possibility which are been has to be investigated in this act. So this is how we can conclude this editorial. So here I have told you so many prelims point of view also and mains examination point of view also. So this is what is about AFSPA, and thank you so much. If you have any doubts and queries, just tell us in the comment section. So much.